I'd like to share an important principle I learned while visiting the Arizona Diamondbacks a few years ago. Their entire organization has been transformed from the front office to players to the fan experience around the acronym of FOTC. So we have been integrating FOTC into our SNAP E&T programming over the past few months as we rapidly pivot. What's FOTC? Find a way to say yes. And here are a few areas that we've discovered about where and how our yeses and our nos impact local programming. So with FOTC, it's really about finding the all or nothing thinking and where is the yes in between. And looking at why. When we hear a no from our participants, no, I don't have that, no, I can't do that. If we keep looking and ask questions like, if we were to do this, or if you were able to, then could you have a yes? It's about asking which questions. How do we address the real participant dilemmas? Asking and listening a lot. What is our community saying? As opposed to before, we had a great program. Our great program a couple months ago would not have been successful in today's environment. Asking our funders and having open conversations, explaining why we are being challenged in a particular area, meeting their requirements, and trying to brainstorm with them and present viable alternatives has been super helpful. So what is best given the circumstances, and really recognizing and flexing constantly and with dynamic parameter changes. We've done assessment of electronic communication. Maybe all your participants have been very tech savvy, but ours were not. We needed to have conversations about devices. What do they even have at home? What kind of data access do they have? Do they have Wi-Fi? What kind of Wi-Fi? Is it stable? What kind of phone plan? Do they have unlimited plans? What about the reliability of their equipment? Do they have a camera, a webcam? Do they use a smartphone as an alternative to capture that camera feature? How can we help them have conversations about exploring a quiet space within their home to interact and dealing with others around in their home? Familiarity, are there any social platforms that they are used to that we can draw some bridges and parallels to help them understand? And what do they need to know? Just asking a lot of questions, because when a person becomes overwhelmed, sometimes they freeze. And so we've been trying really hard to help people incrementally move to the next stage. A lot of what we're doing is group training to start with, but we find that we quickly move to a lot of one-on-one dealing with unique situations and trying to help people that are confused and overwhelmed. Electronic communication training. Before enrolling, we spend a lot of time preparing participants by going through a tiered approach. Some are really good to go, but many have many steps to acclimate toward a very foreign experience. We need to help them customize their devices, really figuring out what is it that they need to know, which buttons to push, and that varies from whatever laptop they have, whatever brand they have, whatever smartphone they're using. Is it Android? Is it iOS system? We've been working with them on downloads, assisting them with upgrading their software, getting their apps in place in advance, troubleshooting their data access, upgrading when necessary, coming up with backup plans. For many of them, it's actually physically having them walk around their apartment and figuring out which corner or which window is easier for them to get a more stable signal. With audio, we've been trying to help them understand the whole muting, not only how to do it, but why to do it. What does screen sharing look like? How do they interact? These are strangers, they've never met each other before, and they're using totally foreign technology. So how do we help them both interact online as well as using the chat features? And how do you get that rhythm of interaction going? There have been a lot of interruptions, some of them very funny, many children popping into the screen, many pets showcasing, a lot of household noise in the background and mowing. And so really helping people understand that what you hear, everybody hears. With scheduling, we needed to take hours and hours of curriculum and compress it into 60 to 90-minute segments, doing a lot of reminders for people. They have very chaotic lives right now, and you can never remind somebody enough, it seems. We've been really encouraging people to move around and try to stay away from video fatigue and increasing their comfort level. What can we do to help them practice, help them debrief, and continue being successful in that mode? The next slide I want to focus on, and again, you'll see my technology here struggling, adjusting the enrollment process. So as I mentioned, our funders really direct what we do and how we do it. And so we had to have those conversations. And the nice thing is we think that we have found some great ways to eliminate some red tape, even moving into the future. Our participants went from a very much paper system to an electronic system. The upsides of that, our documents are much neater. They're not handwritten. They can make corrections if they make an error. The transfer speed is fast, so that's good. We made all of our forms fill in the blank and check-offs, which was new. The application process itself, for some people, being on site, the paper pencil, they kept asking, well, can we just come in? And so we were able to, for some people, email forms. For others, we would need to print them off and then mail them through the Postal Service. And literally for others, we needed to do them for them. And by that, I mean have the form pulled up on our screen, getting them on the phone, asking them every question, filling in their question for them, and then printing out the form for our files, as well as emailing them an electronic copy so they would have it. We talked with them. Some people knew what an electronic signature was, but most didn't. And even if they did, they didn't know how. So some we were able to teach how to do that. We also got permission from some of our funders to have varying different email statements where the participant would email the document that we had filled out for them back with the essence of saying this document was completed via my information and it is accurate. With the submission of forms, we taught people how to save and attach forms. For some, we were able to help them do a screenshot and send that. And for others, we had them physically take a picture with their camera, lining up the form page by page and sending that. That seemed to be more comfortable. Locating and replacing documents became a big issue for many of our transient and homeless people, and even people that were temporarily getting sick. They needed to go somewhere else, or if someone in the household got sick, and they left their documents behind. So we did a lot of reminders, and we were always along the way looking, what can we do to increase their yeses at every step and creatively brainstorm around any roadblocks, our no's. And then the next slide is training and case management. And what I wanted to say about that, as soon as I get it to click here, there we go. Timing and scheduling around family needs, and a lot of them either had children or they were in a multi-generational household and they were maybe grandparents where the parents were expecting them before to care for their children, so we need to work around that. The course length, we recognize that somebody could make a commitment today, but tomorrow their lives turn upside down. And so some people weren't able to finish, or at least they needed a lot of assistance in trying to resolve that immediate barrier before they could get back with us. With health, our people were dealing not only with their own illnesses, but family, extended family. And we literally had 45% of our people in our first cohort have an immediate family death. And so that shows an incredible tenacity of our participants to continue on. They needed emotional support, We needed to have intentional times to incorporate checking in with them. How are they doing? And they found that the group, this group of strangers, of faces on their screen, became their community. And that was a really valuable component. We worked a lot with balance, trying to figure out how much is helpful and what's too much and what becomes overwhelming. And that varied really between participant to participant and even from day to day. Some people were able to handle a lot of assistance and others were like, you know what, I can't do it anymore. And so we would circle back the next day and pick it up again. Our team had never done this before either. So fortunately, they were very versatile. They revised their curriculum. They figured out how to do screen share, how to do presentations virtually, we really wanted to incorporate the interactional component and make it personal. And so we spent a lot of time on the back and forth and trying to do some exercises to encourage participants to engage on the front end. So that became the norm. And even our support services, rather than to give them a public transportation card, we needed to work with our local vendors to set up electronic cards, and sometimes we would be able to mail out a card at zero balance and electronically load it for them. And others would actually come into the office and pick up. So there we were dealing with the social distancing and everything, setting up. So in closing, as I click to the last slide here, there we go. It's really about adaptability and priorities regarding decision-making, crisis intervention, resource sharing, self-care, recognizing that our participants are really part of a bigger network. It's not just them that we're dealing with. Trying to help them find routines in the middle of chaos, really trying to honor their values and ask about their goals, both short and long-term goals, and capitalizing on what yes, can remain in the midst of transforming our work. We really believe that many of the things that we've learned over the last couple of months, regardless of what the future is, will be really important components that we have been forced to learn how to say yes. And so thank you so much for your time, and we really hope that FOTC will help you.
Thank you, Judy. Now we go to Liz.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, awesome. So I'm Lizzarnecki. I'm the Director of Training at Addams Resource Corporation. We also go by Jarc. And we have a location in Chicago, getting ready to open up a second location on the west side of Chicago in just a few weeks. And then we also have a location in Baltimore. And so I'm the Director of Training at our north side location in Chicago. So for those of you who are not familiar with Jarc, we provide skills training in the manufacturing industry in welding, computer numerical control machining, CNC, press brake, and we're starting a new training program on assembly as well. And so in addition to that, we have a manufacturing bridge program where some of our training participants who start out that need some more help in math and reading in order to be successful in advanced training start there, and then transition to sector training in manufacturing where they're going to earn credentials. We also assist with job placement and provide a range of wraparound support services. I should mention that we are a WIOA provider, Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act provider, as well as SNAP to Success currently. So on the next few slides, before I get started here, I just wanted to let you know I'll be talking about Jarc's process for preparing trainees and staff to return to in-person training. We are currently doing a hybrid in-person remote training model that I'll talk a little bit about. I'll review some on-site safety procedures that we developed and things that we took into consideration. I'll talk a little bit more about our staggered scheduling, which again includes both in-person training as well as remote learning and services. And then I'll close out with some questions that you may want to consider as you plan to resume either remote training or in-person services. So one of the first steps that we took, so I should say we closed our training center about mid-March. And we immediately began remote training and learning. It took a little while to get up and running, but we did that for a couple of months. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail on a future slide. But about after a month or a month and a half, we established a COVID safety committee. It was a cross-team staff committee to really start planning for a return to in-person training. We knew we couldn't do it at that point, in late April, May, but we wanted to at least start the process of, developing policies and procedures to make sure that when we did return, that we were able to keep everyone safe. We used information from the CDC to inform our planning, as well as information from the state of Illinois and city of Chicago's departments of health. And you'll see on the slide here the different things that we considered and worked on with this committee. Sorry, I'm going to move some notes that I have here, just so it's a little bit better. So those are all the things that we worked on as a committee. And I'd say we met probably 4 or 5 times virtually on Zoom, and then had a lot of kind of homework and next steps to follow up on after. And so one of the things that we made sure to do and develop before we allowed anyone to return to our training center was to develop a COVID safety training for both staff and trainees. So we did this training both via Zoom as well as in person once folks got into our training center. So we wanted to make sure that everyone had things down, so we had folks go through it twice. It did include a lot of videos and information, including symptoms to keep an eye out for, how to properly use personal protective equipment, PPE, such as gloves, masks. We had videos on how to do proper hand washing, as well as how to put on and take off your masks, as well as details about what it would be like for the trainees when they were to return, what they would expect when they first came into the training center, and how their day would look a little bit different given the COVID safety procedures. And then we also reviewed what to do if trainees and staff had symptoms, as well as kind of our procedures in terms of when and if we would require someone to take a break from training and go get tested. So as part of that, so we did develop a daily screening process. And so I should mention that we've all come back to the training center, at least part-time, I should say trainees, as well as a handful of staff, not of all of our staff. And so we do have a daily screening procedure when both staff and trainees come in. The first thing that's done is we have a temperature gun. And so staff, I'm there as a director every morning to take each trainee's temperature, as well as ask some screening questions. It's about 3 questions related to traveling and whether someone's been in contact with someone with COVID, as well as questions around COVID-related symptoms. And then at that point, the trainee signs the time that they come in and the time that they come out of training or leave training. And then we make sure to save those documents in a confidential place on our server. So that way, if someone does test positive or states that they have symptoms, we will know exactly who had been in the training center that day or that week. And if anyone is interested, after this presentation, I am happy to share the PowerPoint that we used for our safety training. In terms of on-site considerations, so like I said, we got back into the training center, at least part-time for trainees, on June 15th. And so one of the big things, as I mentioned, was limiting the number of staff and trainees. So generally, we have our welding program as well as our CNC program taking place at the same time, 5 days a week in our training center. Just given the need for social distancing, Each class is at the training center 2 days a week and is doing remote learning the other 3 days a week. So we have welders there currently on Mondays and Wednesdays, and CNC trainees on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We initially started with a max of 10 trainees, which our programs had been a little bit smaller during kind of the COVID period with a few people falling off. But we've upped that number to a max of 15 trainees now, and we have things in place in terms of scheduling and social distancing to make sure that people stay safe. As I mentioned, a lot of our other services are continuing to happen remotely, such as financial coaching sessions, employment coaching sessions, the program coordinators that, to a certain extent, serve somewhat like case managers. They're providing their services remotely. And then we also needed to make sure before we opened that we had plenty of masks and gloves, as well as hand sanitizer. Trainees are allowed to take a new mask each day. We have a whole daily sanitizing process, both for staff as well as for trainees at the end of the day. And then you'll see this photo here of our computer lab that's looking, a little bit in disarray, but that's because we decided the safest thing to do was to cover the computers that would not be used by trainees, and each day have each trainee only use one computer, and then it would be cleaned at the end of the day. So we knew that there was no, limited sharing of any type of equipment. And then another thing that we put into place was we generally had trainees eating in this small space in the training center. And so we actually put a table out on a loading dock. We're in an industrial area where they're eating lunch outside. And then rather than using our water fountains, which we've turned off, we've purchased bottled water. So a handful of things that we've done on site. As I mentioned, we're doing hybrid training. So 2 days a week in person and 3 days a week remotely. I should also mention that when we start new trainees, they're doing their first 3 weeks of training remotely. And so that's just in terms of, doing the things that they can do at home. So we have live Zoom classes for our manufacturing skills classes where they're learning math and blueprints, etc. So those happen live with an instructor. We also purchased Tooling U, which is a subscription from a manufacturing association where there are online modules for welding and CNC, for example. And then we're using Canvas as a learning platform for our bridge program where the instructors can upload assignments and quizzes. Additionally, we've realized a lot of our folks didn't have access to technology, and so we were lucky enough to receive a private grant, or actually a couple private grants, that we were able to purchase. We ended up purchasing Chromebooks for trainees that were in need. So some trainees already had computers at home. Others, we purchased Chromebooks, about $300, and have them email or mailed directly to the trainee's home, as well as any books that they needed or equipment, like a metrology measuring kit for manufacturing. And then for a couple folks, we were able to assist them with getting free Wi-Fi through Comcast. That took a little time, but those were the things that we really needed to do in order to get folks going. So we make sure before anyone starts that we're assisting them with Wi-Fi access and also mailing them a Chromebook and any other materials that they're going to need to be successful. And then, of course, coordination and planning is key because we want to make sure that our new participants have everything that they need in their first day, or at least in their first couple days, so that they can be successful working at home. And then these are just a few things to consider as you think about restarting your programming or changing your programming to adjust for COVID. What elements of your program can be delivered remotely versus in person? What technology and resources do your participants need to be successful, as well as your staff? We definitely had to provide some laptops for a few of our staff. Which staff are actually required, can work remotely and provide services remotely at this point, and which staff would need to be on site? That's definitely a consideration that we've made. Is there an option to stagger your scheduling, for example, or split the class in half? in order to make sure that people can socially distance and be safe. And then, of course, what additional supports do your participants need? Especially during this time, especially if their families have been affected by COVID, such as utility assistance, rental assistance, technology. We've been providing a lot of support services, even more so than usual, to our participants and their families during this time. And then also, can your participants travel safely to training? Some of our participants have cars, and we're able to provide, gas cards. For those who are taking Ventra, one of our community partners was able to donate Lyft rides. We have also been able to, use SNAP employment and training funds currently to support folks with Lyft and Uber, especially as public transportation may not be the safest option. So these are just a few of the questions that we considered. So anyway, that's all I have for now. And again, if you have questions, feel free to ask them. And I'm also happy to share the COVID training that we developed at Jarc, if that's of interest to anyone. Thanks.
Okay, I'm turning it over to Ian, the other presenter now.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Liz. I think you may hear some things the same as what we're doing, and since we're talking about best practices, that makes a lot of sense. But I want to take you a little bit, just real briefly, who Lutheran Metropolitan Ministry is, what our culinary training program looks like on the Snap to Skills program, and then the practices we're using for a completely in-person training experience. So for over 50 years, since 1969, LMM has been around to help enhance the lives of people who are most expressed, the hardest to serve. It came directly out of a response to, in Cleveland, what were known as the Huff Riots or Huff Uprising. And there was a lot of unrest throughout the country. And our founders saw a number of people returning to the community who had reentry issues. They were experiencing homelessness, they were experiencing unemployment. And that's where LMM really came in to fill that need in the community. So. We do it through three major branches. So housing and shelter, we operate the largest men's homeless shelter in the state of Ohio. We have over 400 men who come through our doors every evening, and we offer them supportive services and wraparound services for them, particularly through our health and wellness. Our health and wellness programs are going to give them both mental health counseling as well as substance use disorder counseling to help address that whole person. My area is all through workforce development. Using trauma-informed care, we take them through job readiness and some pretty extensive work experience programs, and then have them sit in credit-bearing coursework in order to start their path towards either a culinary certificate or an associate degree program, which I'll talk about here a little bit more. So our program in workforce development is designed with multiple on and off ramps. And so what I mean by that is we know the students that we serve may not be able to stay with us for a full 9 months or 18 months, but we want to make sure that they're hitting milestones throughout that journey. So after 3 months in our culinary program, they'll receive their ServSafe Manager designation. Great industry recognized credential, usually translates here in Northeast Ohio to about a 10 to 11 hour job. From there, for 6 months, they would get their culinary art certificate, usually a 12 to 14 an hour job. And then if they can continue with us, we can get them a hospitality diploma at 9 months. And then at 18 months, they would be able to earn an associate of applied science in the culinary arts. LMM is fully accredited, both through our state regulatory agency, the Ohio State Board of Career Colleges and Schools, and nationally accredited toward associate degrees through the Council on Occupational Education. We wanted to also build in those next stepping stones and further success stories when they leave our doors. So we've articulated both with Kent State University as well as Notre Dame College locally to accept those credits in that our students are getting if they want to continue on their education. For the Snap to Skills program particularly, we wanted to focus on the 6-month program that would have the shortest amount of time but the highest amount of impact for the folks who we serve. So in our Snap to Skills program, they're going to go through math and English. It's your regular gen eds, obviously job readiness, our safety and sanitation course with the ServSafe Manager designation, and then your culinary pieces all within 6 months. Full culinary program, grill, braise, boil. So you're going to get a little bit of everything. And it's going to include over 220 hours of work experience, as well as 48 hours in our culinary lab. The importance of our kitchen and why that work experience is so important to our agency and why we needed in-person training is because we serve over 2,000 meals every day to folks experiencing homelessness in Northeast Ohio. And our students are a big part of my staff in order to get those meals out for those who are most vulnerable. So we needed to get them back on campus, but we needed to do it very safely. So one of the things that we wanted to do is obviously start right from the beginning. Almost every state or your local board of health is going to give you some guidelines to get your program restarted. We wanted to utilize that which was most closest to us because we are in food service. So we looked at the one for restaurants, bars, catering facilities. We wanted to make sure that we were using best practices, and I'll talk a little bit more about being able to flex to some industry standards even with COVID being here. So that's where it started from us, for us. We wanted to set those expectations at first contact. So from the minute the student comes to our building with orientation from the phone call, we are setting those expectations for what's expected for in-person training. We have put rules in place for consistency. We wanted to make sure that there is no, you may have seen in some other places, well, we're going to do this today, we're going to do this tomorrow. We wanted to avoid inconsistency because we thought it would only be confusing to those folks we serve. So before they walk in the door, they know exactly what the rules are. And then with enforcement, it's really zero tolerance as far as following what we need in order to be able to continue training. It's not just one voice who's doing this enforcement either. It is actually everyone on the team doing this enforcement, and it's zero tolerance, meaning that everyone is following the exact same rules as the students, as well as all of our individuals. And we made sure we got proper signage to have around the building prior to arrival. So we screen our individuals prior to ever stepping foot inside the building. We're going to do the temperature, as you may have heard, with the temperature gun. You saw the guideline at 100.4, and if they're above that, so far we have yet to have anyone temp above that, so we feel we're doing a really nice piece with that. We always have masks. If our students are not masked up by the time they get to our door, we will make sure they get masked, and we encourage our participants to really find the mask that fits best for them and what's most comfortable for them. So whether it be a gaiter that you pull up around your neck, we have surgical masks and N95s if someone asks for that, or maybe it's just a bandana to make sure that we can mask up and have that protection for everyone. Our students also perform a self-assessment and acknowledge the questions similar to what Liz was talking about for her program prior to coming in, and then signing off on that with marking attendance. In our classroom, we needed to build them in a socially distant way. So all of our students sit at least 6 feet apart from each other. We are lucky to have the space to be able to offer this type of classroom. And that's when they're in their job readiness, their English, their math, as they're moving forward. We wanted to then also use technology where we could. So even though we needed students to be on site for us, we wanted to be able to protect our vulnerable instructors. So where those instructors could remotely be brought in via video conferencing to still provide instruction and have interaction with the students, even if they may have been vulnerable. So even though we couldn't have them on campus or in our building, they could continue to offer that instruction. The in-person instruction for us, we knew we attracted students who wanted experiential learning. So we knew that by taking them to remote, we were going to lose some of those students who counted on us for that in-person training. So it was very important to build that back up, and we think we've done it in an extremely safe way. The only other thing I really wanted to talk about today is allow for some flexibility for best industry practices. So you can see Ron here working in the kitchen. When they're in our kitchen, they're completely socially distanced. Our kitchen is over 6,000 square feet. But we also wanted to take into account that there can be some other competing risks and safety measures when it comes to PPE. In a kitchen setting, a hot grease pan or boiling water flying on your face with a mask could be a larger risk than the potential for spread. So we have instituted strict social distancing in the kitchen while relaxing some of those mask mandates to make sure we keep our students as safe as possible. So I know a lot of this was probably a bit of a repeat from what Liz, but that's because it really is what works. We have yet to have a student experience symptoms. We have yet to have any spread within our building. And we believe it's because of these measures we've been doing for the past month and a half have really taken us to where we need to be. Thank you so much. Look forward to any questions, and I appreciate you guys following along with me.
Thanks, Ian. We have a few minutes, and we've gotten some interesting questions through the chat. I want to stress that this is being recorded, and I will get it posted on YouTube by the close of business today. The PowerPoint slides, I have them all now. I will put them into a PDF, and I will email them out to the list of everybody that's logged in, which is actually 193 people. So thanks everybody for joining. We had a question on 50-50 funding, so I'm going to ask the first question. For all three organizations hired, Lutheran Metropolitan Ministries and Jarc, do you co-enroll in SNAP E&T and WIOA? Anybody?
Oh, yeah. This is Liz with Jarc. We do not co-enroll with SNAP E&T and WIO. We have co-enrolled with CDBG funds, as well as other, primarily CDBG funds, but not WIOA.
So not particularly WIOA, although, well, I guess there is some WIOA funds. We have a partnership with a nonprofit, Maximus, here. They have a DOL grant program called PACE. So we have our students, our SNAP students co-enroll with those PACE students. PACE students are typically on TANF, so cash assistance. So they are in a very similar boat as our SNAP students. And then I have a partnership with another local reentry nonprofit who provides referrals for our students to come in if they've had contact with the criminal justice system.
Judy? You're on mute, Judy.
The only funding that we use for co-enrollment would be state funds, local funds, or philanthropic funds. We don't use WIOA at all for that particular program.
That's good. That makes it easy to come up with the other 50% for SNAP E&T 50-50. We have requests response to Liz's offer to share the COVID training videos you made for your participants. Can you share them with me? I can send them out, or do you have them posted and you can give us the link?
I can share them. I can share it with you, Ray.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and I should just a caveat that there may be a couple pieces that we need to update, but for the most part, a lot of it, because it is, you know, step-by-step safety on how to put on and take off gloves and those things, is accurate. But yeah, I can definitely share that.
Okay. And we are almost out of time. We have several more interesting questions from the chat. I'm going to email them to the panelists. And can you please give me a written response? And I will email them out to all our attendees. Okay. Thank you very much. You guys have been great. I think there's some lessons to be learned in what you're doing. I really like the approach that you've been really conscientious about bringing the clients along and making sure that people can adapt to both online learning and then coming back under social distancing. That's it for today. Thank you very much, and I will be sending stuff out.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.